Hello and welcome back to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. I hope that you're having a beautiful day today no matter what it is you're doing. For the free wire tutorial on YouTube today, I'd like to share with you a technique to create your very own 2-into-1 connector. Now you can up the number of prongs on this design to make it into however many you want into one connector. The point is that what we're going to do is we're going to have 2 strands coming in from one side to 1 strand coming out the other side. It can be used in all of your beading projects. It can be used to finish your mala necklaces instead of a guru bead if you're struggling to find the correct components. If you'd like to join me down at the board, I'll show you a little bit more closely what it is we're going to do today. So this is the design that we're going to create. If you have some downtime or you're not feeling particularly creative but you do want to be useful, you can create a bunch of these and then later connect them with jump rings or by putting your beading thread through the ends. A way that you could use a design like this is if you have an asymmetric necklace. So here's the back of a necklace that I've designed. And on the front of the necklace we've got a slightly shorter strand and then a slightly longer strand, and they're designed to join over lower on the far side. So in where this will dip slightly like an off-centered smile. And what we could do if we wanted to was very simply connect these 3 things with a single jump ring. Now that is a very useful way to do things, but what I'd like to do is up the quality slightly and make a design feature of joining those pieces together. So I'm going to show you how to make the 2-into-1 connector with a single strand of wire today. Well, let's just clear the board and move this out of the way for now. And I'm going to bring my wire of choice into position. So I'm working with round raw copper wire in 1mm gauge or 18 gauge. And I have around about 9 inches here. Now this is far more than we need, but those offcuts are always useful. This is the design that we're going to create, an almost seamless 3-way or 2-into-1 connector. So if you wanted to, you could draw 2 of those prongs slightly closer together and have one coming out in the opposite direction. So let me just pop that up in the corner and we will get cracking on recreating this design. Now for your wire projects to work smoothly, it always pays to take a moment to warm your wire through, get that lovely and smooth and fluid and straight to begin with. So as I say, there's about 9 inches here to begin with, and I've just got that super toasty warm and it's ready to go to work for us. So I'm going to bring my pliers about 2 inches from one of those ends. I'm going to turn quite a sharp right angle to begin with. I'm now going to be working with my round nose pliers. I'm going to pop those in and roll the design around. So what I tend to do when I'm making wrapped loops is I hold the pliers into position to make that first section just by rolling them along that wire towards the bend that we made. I'll then remove the pliers before popping them back in, switching position if I need to, and drawing that tail all the way around and across. Now you can, if you like, just make that super perfect, make sure that that's completely round, or you could, instead of round nose pliers, be using your multi-step bail make pliers. It's entirely up to you. So I'm just going to make sure that everything is super toasty warm, and we're going to continue by making our first wrapped loop. So if I grip a hold of the circular form which we've created, now at this juncture, before we move any further, if you were threading into a design, you could slide on one of those pieces, like so. And in that way we'll be able to make the piece all in one step without the use of any jump rings. Now it's entirely up to you how many jump rings you want to use in your jewellery. I prefer, if I'm honest, to use this technique, which is wiring directly into the beading thread. There are fewer moving parts and jump rings have been known to fail. So this would be my preference. I would be putting in the connecting parts of my design as we go. However, what that does is it makes it tricky for me to show you how to continue the design. So you'd add on your loop or your piece of chain if you're using chain, pop that into the circular form that you've created. But I'm going to do that without today because it is much easier to show you. What I will show you though is how to hold that circular form without crushing whatever you've added into your loop and without crushing where the wires cross over. So what I'm going to do now is to create that wrapped section. Now what I prefer to do is to try and recreate the number of wraps that are visible, and all I'm doing is I'm creating a coil away from the looped section, and we've got 4.5 loops visible. If there's a little bit of a gap in there, you can just tighten that up by putting one end of your pliers inside the loop and the other on the end of the coil. You do need to be conscientious that you're making small and gradual gentle movements to make that nice and tidy. I'm going to take the flush side of my flush cutters and just trim away the excess, making sure that I am indeed cutting the correct piece of wire before I make that final incision. That sounded a bit surgical, it's not supposed to. What I will then do is just tidy the end of my cut wire away, just by rotating those pliers around. Now any flat pliers will do. You could use tapered chain nose pliers like these, or you could use my absolute favourites, which are the bent chain nose pliers. So once we have our first loop ready, and as I say, if you're wanting to use this design without adding in any jump rings, then you will have added in your first of your 3 items to connect. Whilst my personal preference would be to add the chain directly into the loops we're creating, or to add the beading wire into the loops we're creating today, you have to find your own way and be comfortable with how your creativity flows. So you can do this exactly how you want to. I'm just here today to share with you the connector technique. So we've created our first of those 3 wrapped loops, and we're going to start making the central section which divides the design into 3 separate directions. So I'm going to use my bent chain nose pliers, hold them underneath, and I'm going to hold them as close as I can to those little coils that we created together just underneath the first loop we've created. What I'm going to do is to create a turn that comes away at an angle, like so. And what I'm trying to do is imagine if this was going to be divided into 3 separate segments, this would be 1/3 of the circular form. So it doesn't have to be exact because we warmed the wire copper to begin with, and you can always add just a little bit more warmth simply by holding the design. You will be able to move that around ever so slightly once we've created the complete connector. So the next thing that I want to do is to make an angle on this section of the wire. And what I'd like that to be is the same distance from this first little bend we've made as it is to the loop to the bend. So you could measure that if you really wanted to, but I'm going to kind of eyeball that and hope for the best. So I've made my first angle, and I need to make another angle in the same direction, this time approximately a right angle. So we've got our loop, we've got a straight line, we've got one bend, and then we have another bend, and I'm just going to flip this around so it's easier for me to make my next loop. Again, I'll be working with my round nose pliers because they are a simple piece of machinery to get hold of. So I'm going to pop those pliers into position, and I'm going to roll that around until I get the first half of my wrapped loop, or my wrapped loop to be. I'm then going to pop those pliers back into position and draw the tail of wire all the way around and over the top. Now your loops don't have to be the exact same size for the design to work, and also sometimes you might want smaller loops on the subdivided side and a larger loop on the single side. So you can play around with the size of those loops to your heart's content. What I'm going to do is add in my section, so I could be adding in chain or a section of beaded wire. I'm just going to hold that loop across the centre. So you'll notice I'm leaving space on this side of the design for my beaded section or chain to come away, and I'm not crushing down where the wire crosses over. And I'm now going to try and replicate the number of coils that we had on that first segment. So I'm just going to run that around a couple of times. As you move through the design, your wire will become slightly more tense, and it will become just slightly more tricky to get those coils neat and tidy. So I'm just going to pull the wire that remains away, just to make sure that that's nice and warm and smooth and ready to work for me. And I'm just going to take a second to tidy up the coils we have remaining. Now if you do make a mistake and these distances aren't exactly the same, doesn't really matter. If you make a mistake, as I have, and I've got those 4 visible coils here, but I can see 5 visible coils on this prong or this arm of the connector, I'm not actually going to let that worry me. What I will do is take a moment just to readjust where that bend occurs, so it's centrally between those 2 points. Now I do need to adjust the angle at which the wire comes away, so that it fits onto that third prong. And I'm going to make this as if I am taking a circle and dividing it into 3 segments. So we're just going to pull that until it sits exactly where I wanted it to sit. So I'm just going to smooth through that lovely raw copper wire again, just so that it's lovely and fluid. And then I'm going to hold that in a position that is suitable for me. I'm right dominant, so using my left non-dominant hand just to support me there. I'm then going to pop my pliers in underneath again, and I'm going to try and replicate the next turn to occur by measuring or guessing the distance from the nexus point of the first loop to the centre of the design. And that's the kind of measurement we're looking to recreate. So I'm going to pull that over to the right this time. That looks reasonably close, and you can see that we've got 2 of our loops already done. So we're going to now create the 3rd loop of our connector. So I'm going to pop those pliers into position again, and you can see how far away I'm holding them along the length of wire. And I'm going to rotate those around. You can open and close those pliers as long as you're gentle a couple of times just to get that first half of the loop. Now there are as many different ways to create a wrapped loop as there are jewellers and jewellery makers. So you need to find the way that works for you best. This is the way that I prefer. After 10 years or so of making these little babies, this is the way I prefer to do it. So I'm going to pull the tail of wire all the way around the arm or prong of those pliers to create my 3rd loop, and I might just tighten that up slightly. You can take a moment to get that to sit exactly how you want it to. I think I might like that just a little bit larger, and if that's the case for you, very, very gently you can open that out. If you wanted that to be smaller, you could just go in the opposite direction, very, very small and gentle movements, and if you've warmed the wire beforehand, job's a good one and you can move on. So we will now add in our 3rd section of either beaded material or chain or whatever it is we're looking to connect. And the reason I'm not doing that today is because it all jumbles underneath the design and makes it very tricky for you to see what is happening in the making of the piece. And I want you to see this as clearly as possible. So I'm now going to put some warmth into the last little bit of wire we have available and start coiling that around the last of those prongs. So that's 1, 2, 3. Might need to just readjust your grip occasionally. And that's 4. So each of these have got a similar number of coils on them. It's not exactly the same, but I'm about to pop a coil over the centre of the design, so I'm not really all that worried. If you want that to be an exact science, then do feel free to use a measurement, and remember to replicate the number of coils on the neck section of each of those wrapped loops. So the wire by now is getting a little bit tense, because we've work hardened, and what will happen when you're twisting and bending and squeezing copper wire is that the work hardening will kind of travel along to the next part of the wire. You haven't even touched it yet, but indeed it is getting a little bit stressed. So before I go any further, I'm just going to address the jagged end that I have here where I cut it from the reel. I'm just going to snip that with the flush side of my flush cutters, get that little offcut in the scrap pot. So all I'm going to do now is add a coil to sit over the centre of our very functional 2-into-1 connector. I'm going to pop those pliers in, all the way to the end of the wire, all the way to the end of those pliers, and I'm going to start rotating that around to start with a circular form, like so. Switching back to my favourite flat facing pliers, you could use flat pliers, whichever is your preference. I'm just going to give it a very gentle squish to get that flat to begin with, and then I'm going to start putting pressure with my non-dominant forefinger, and I'm going to use that finger to help me to create a really nice smooth coil. Now at the moment the coil is forming at 90 degrees to the connector, and that's simply because it's easier for me to manage holding the connector and creating that coil neatly. So you can see a lot of people will go through coil creation very, very quickly. I'm actually a little bit more methodical. I prefer to take the extra time to get that as neat as I possibly can. I'm only a human, but I'd like it to be as neat as I can create it. So I'm just going to squish and squeeze until that sits as close as possible to that last prong. And all I will do then is flap it down, as it were, and sit it over the face of the centre. So you might need to just push that ever so slightly so that it sits more centrally. And as I said earlier, because we warmed the wire, you do have the capacity to just change the direction of these connection loops as you prefer. So if you want to, you can bring them quite closely together. So you've got two on one side, one on the other. You might need a piece of jewellery where you're looking to connect two sections out to the side, and then drop something down. If you're looking to create mala necklaces, it's really lovely if you can get a 2-in-1 bead, known often as a guru bead, to just drop down the last little tassel. If you don't have access to one of those and you just want a connector that will bring two strands together and then have one strand coming away, like this little necklace can, or this is just a little design just to show that you could add in some jump rings just to add that on, and then you've got like a 2-in-1 design. So let me just pop that back out of the way. You've got so many options of how you can use that. You can even up the number of prongs to create a connector. Underneath, it's not messy. You don't have any cut ends to worry about. So you have one cut end on the wrapped loop of your first design, which you smoothed down earlier, and the other end of the wire is in the centre of your coil. So you have a very, very usable technique here, and you can, as I say, moderate that so that it sits exactly how you wish it to. So that's how you create your 2-in-1 connector, or a 3-way connector, however you like to think of it. What I'm going to do now is just very quickly show you how you can add in some jump rings if you want to use these after the event, in so much as you're not creating with them at the time. You can stockpile these if you're having a bit of a bad mojo week, but you still want to be useful, you still want to work with wire, but you're not feeling the creative nature, then you can make a bunch of these, stick them in a pot for when you do need them. So you can see the 2-in-1 connector that we made together today. That would be lovely to use in a mala necklace. So I'm going to pop that back up to one side. The one that I created yesterday is here to show you a little bit more of an angular situation. So we've got two loops that are close together and one that's by itself. Now, jump rings and myself, we're not the best of friends, but we don't hate each other. What I'm going to do is take the first of my connecting beading threads, and I'm going to drop in the first of those loops that we created together, and I'm going to open and close. Now, I don't know where my other bent chain nose pliers are, so you're just going to have to suffer with me using chain nose pliers, I'm afraid. So that's the first one in, and then we're going to add in the second one, just to connect these pieces together, simply so you can see how a 2-in-1 connector can be useful in your asymmetric jewellery, or you could even do the same thing on both sides. It 100% will work. That's the first two together. Like I said, me and these little babies, we're not the best of friends, so if it looks a bit clumsy, this is why I don't do chainmail videos. I'm going to add in my section of beaded chain. Just turn that over so I can hold it better. And then once I have that gripped, I'm just going to close that up on the far side. And we'll pop this down on the board. So if that was an asymmetric piece of jewellery, obviously you could hang that however you wanted to, or you could hang with the connector on both sides. It's just to show you how different it will look when you take the effort to make the extra components yourself. It's entirely up to you how you use these little babies, but I think they're super useful. Thank you very much for hanging out with me today. I hope you have a beautiful day, and I look forward to welcoming you back to the Gemhawks YouTube channel very soon. Bye for now.